Once upon a time, in the land of Umwofia, there was a small village known for its great warriors and wise elders. The people of Umwofia loved to dance, sing, and tell stories by the fire every night. The village was peaceful, and everyone knew one another. In this village, there lived a young girl named Nwanyi. She was the daughter of Ease, the best drummer in the village. Nwanyi loved her father's drum, and every day she would sneak into his hut, trying to play the same tunes that made the people dance. Ease always warned her, "Nwanyi, you are too young to touch the drum. The drum is for strong hands and wise hearts." But Nwanyi would not listen. One day, while playing by the river, Nwanyi met a young warrior named Afani. He was strong and handsome, and he was one of the bravest warriors in the village. He would tell her stories of battles he fought, animals he hunted, and the spirits he had seen in the forest. Nwanyi admired him, and soon, they became very close. But one day, Nwanyi started to feel strange. Her stomach grew bigger, and she felt sick all the time. She did not know what was happening to her. One morning, she ran to her mother, crying, "Mama, something is wrong with me. My belly is growing, and I feel very sick." Her mother, Amaka, looked at her closely, and her face changed. She quickly understood what was happening. Nwanyi was carrying a child. She was pregnant. Amaka's heart sank. In the village, it was a great shame for a girl to have a baby before she was married. She knew what the people would say and what the elders would do. They would judge Nwanyi, and her life would never be the same. Amaka took Nwanyi inside their hut and whispered, "You must not tell anyone about this yet. Let me talk to your father first." Nwanyi was scared. She had never seen her mother look so worried. She sat quietly, hoping her mother would fix everything. That night, when Ease came home, Amaka told him the truth about Nwanyi. Ease was angry. He could not believe what he was hearing. "How could this happen?" he shouted. "Who is responsible for this?" Amaka looked down and said softly, "It is Afani, the warrior." Ease's eyes widened with rage. "Afani? How dare he? He has brought shame to our family." The next morning, Ease went to see Afani. When he found him training with other warriors, he grabbed him by the arm and pulled him aside. "You have done something terrible," Ease said, his voice trembling with anger. "You have made my daughter pregnant. You must marry her." But Afani was a proud warrior. He did not want to marry Nwanyi. "I am not ready for marriage," he said. "I am a warrior, and I must go to war. I cannot stay in the village to care for a child." Ease was furious. He raised his hand to strike Afani, but the other warriors held him back. "You will pay for this," Ease shouted. "You cannot run away from your responsibility." The news of Nwanyi's pregnancy spread through the village like wildfire. The elders called a meeting to decide what should be done. In the center of the village, under the big irako tree, the people gathered to hear the judgment. The chief elder, Papa Ozoemena, stood up and called for silence. "Nwanyi, daughter of Ease, has broken the laws of our village," he said. "She has become pregnant without being married. This is a serious offense." The people murmured among themselves. Some blamed Nwanyi, while others blamed Afani. But Papa Ozoemena raised his hand for silence again. "We must decide what is to be done. Should we send her away, or should Afani be made to marry her?" Before anyone could speak, Nwanyi stood up. Her voice was small but clear. "I am sorry for what I have done," she said. "But I did not plan for this. I did not mean to bring shame to my family or my village. Please, do not send me away." The elders looked at one another. Finally, Papa Ozoemena spoke. "You are young, and you have made a mistake. But you are brave to admit it. We will not send you away. But Afani must marry you and take care of the child." Afani, who had been standing quietly at the back of the crowd, stepped forward. "I will not marry her," he said boldly. "I am a warrior, and my place is on the battlefield, not in a hut with a crying baby." The crowd gasped. Never before had a warrior defied the elders in such a way. Ease stepped forward, his fists clenched. You will marry her, or I will make sure you never walk again, he threatened. But before Ease could take another step, Papa Ozoemena raised his hand. Let us not spill blood over this, he said. Afani, you are free to choose your path. But know this, the spirits are watching, and they do not forget. With that, the meeting was over, and the crowd dispersed. Nwanyi was left standing alone, her heart heavy with sorrow. Afani had refused to take responsibility, and now she did not know what the future held for her. As the days passed, Nwanyi became more and more isolated. The other girls in the village no longer played with her, and the women whispered behind her back. Even her father, Ease, could barely look at her without anger in his eyes. Nwanyi felt ashamed and alone. But then something unexpected happened. One night, while she was sitting by the river, Nwanyi heard the sound of drums in the distance. It was her father's drum, the one she had always loved to play. She followed the sound through the forest until she came to a clearing. There, under the light of the full moon, she saw a group of women dancing. They were dressed in white, and their faces were painted with symbols of the ancestors. One of the women stepped forward and placed a hand on Nwanyi's shoulder. Do not be afraid, she said. We are the women of the forest, and we have been watching you. You are stronger than you know, Nwanyi. The woman handed her a small drum. Take this, she said. It will guide you. When the time is right, you will know what to do. Nwanyi took the drum and thanked the women. She felt a strange sense of peace as she walked back to the village. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope. And so, the story of Nwanyi and the secret of the drum began to unfold. With the drum in her hands and the wisdom of the women of the forest in her heart, Nwanyi set out on a journey that would change her life and the life of her unborn child forever. When Nwanyi returned to the village with the drum in her hands, she did not tell anyone about the women in the forest. She kept their words close to her heart, knowing they had given her a gift. But the drum was not like any other drum she had seen before. It was small, yet beautifully carved with symbols she did not understand. She touched it gently, feeling a strange warmth from the drum as if it was alive. The days in the village grew colder. People still whispered when they saw her, and her belly grew larger. Nwanyi spent most of her time alone by the river, where she played her drum softly. Every time she played, she felt a little stronger. The women in the village still refused to speak to her, and Afani continued to avoid her. One evening, as Nwanyi sat by the fire in her hut, she heard her father's voice outside. Nwanyi, he called. Come and sit with me. Nwanyi stepped out of the hut, unsure of what her father wanted. She sat beside him on the log in front of their house. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her with softer eyes. I have been thinking, Ease said, his voice low. I was angry at you for what happened. But you are still my daughter, and I see that you are suffering. Tears welled up in Nwanyi's eyes, but she did not speak. Ease sighed. I want to help you. I want to protect you, but I don't know how. Nwanyi wiped her eyes and looked at the drum she had been carrying. She took a deep breath. Father, there is something I have to tell you. She then told him about the night she followed the sound of the drums into the forest and met the mysterious women. She told him about the small drum they had given her and the words they spoke. Ease listened quietly, his eyes growing wide with wonder. The women of the forest, he whispered. They are spirits of our ancestors. If they gave you the drum, it must be special. Nwanyi nodded. I don't know what it means, but I feel that it's important. Ease placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we will trust in the spirits. The drum will guide you when the time is right. From that night, Ease began to soften toward Nwanyi. He no longer shouted at her, and he defended her whenever the villagers spoke ill of her. But Nwanyi still felt the weight of her situation. She was carrying a child, and the father had rejected her. Weeks later, Afani came back from a hunting trip with the other warriors. He had been gone for many days, and during that time, Nwanyi's belly had grown even bigger. She was now in the final stages of her pregnancy. When Afani saw her by the river one afternoon, he hesitated. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to do. But then he walked over to her and said, "Nwanyi, I need to speak with you." Nwanyi looked up, surprised to see him. She had not spoken to him since the meeting under the irako tree. "What do you want, Afani?" she asked. He looked at her belly and then back at her face. "I've been thinking about what the elders said. I know I said I would not marry you, but..." His voice trailed off as if he was unsure of how to continue. Nwanyi stared at him for a moment. She remembered how proud he had been at the village meeting, refusing to take responsibility for their child. "You made your choice," she said quietly. "I don't need you to change your mind now." Afani's face hardened. "I'm a warrior, Nwanyi. I have duties. I can't just stay here and be a father." Nwanyi's eyes flashed with anger. "Then go. Go and be the warrior you want to be. But know this, our child will be born with or without you." Afani stood there for a moment, stunned by her words. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Nwanyi watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of sadness and anger. She knew now that she would raise the child alone. As the days passed, Nwanyi continued to play her drum by the river. Each time she played, the sound grew louder and stronger. The villagers began to notice the strange, beautiful music that came from the forest at night. Some said it was the sound of spirits, others believed it was the work of the ancestors. But then something happened that no one in the village could have predicted. One night, just as Nwanyi's labor began, a great storm rolled over Umuofia. The skies darkened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The winds howled, and the trees bent under the force of the storm. The people of the village ran inside their huts, fearing the power of the storm. But Nwanyi was not afraid. She clutched the drum tightly in her hands as the first pains of childbirth began. The storm raged outside, but Nwanyi remained calm, her fingers drumming softly on the skin of the drum. As the storm reached its peak, a strange thing happened. The sound of Nwanyi's drum began to grow louder and louder, echoing through the village. The winds seemed to dance to the rhythm of the drum, and the thunder rumbled in time with the beat. Inside her hut, Nwanyi felt a surge of energy. The pain of childbirth faded, replaced by a sense of power and peace. The women of the village, hearing the strange music, rushed to her hut to help her. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the hut, there was only calm. As the women gathered around Nwanyi, the sound of the drum filled the air. And then, as the storm reached its fiercest point, the child was born. It was a boy. Nwanyi held her son in her arms, her heart filled with love and pride. The storm outside began to calm, and the winds slowly died down. The villagers, who had been watching in awe, whispered among themselves. They knew that this was no ordinary child. The spirits had been present at his birth. When the storm finally passed, the people gathered outside Nwanyi's hut. They looked at her with new eyes, no longer seeing the girl who had brought shame to her family, but the mother of a special child. Papa Ozoemena, the chief elder, stepped forward. "The spirits have spoken," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This child is a gift to our village. He was born during the storm, with the sound of the drum. He will be known as Osandu, the child of the storm." Nwanyi smiled through her tears. She knew now that the drum had guided her, just as the women in the forest had promised. Her son, Osandu, was destined for greatness. And so, the unwanted pregnancy that had once brought shame to Nwanyi and her family became a blessing to the entire village of Umuofia. The people no longer whispered behind her back, and even Afani, who had once turned his back on her, looked at his son with pride. From that day on, Nwanyi was known as the keeper of the sacred drum. Whenever there was a storm, the people would gather in the village square, waiting for the sound of the drum to guide them through the night. And Osandu, the child of the storm, grew up to become one of the greatest warriors and leaders that Umuofia had ever known.